truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Monday, September 2nd, 2024, the 1321st day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening through a paid subscription at I'mYourModerator.substack.com. You can become a paid subscriber for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month. And in doing so, you'll get the ad-free experience. You'll be able to participate in the conversation over on Substack. And you'll be invited to the interactive live stream every Wednesday afternoon. And if you can't or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the podcast for free on Substack, a wide variety of podcast platforms, and of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. Anyone who understands the roller coaster we've been on these past few years knows we haven't reached the end yet, and there may still be hard times to come. And as we add $1 trillion to the national debt every 100 days, we could be headed for some shaky financial times. If you're like me, you're figuring out how to diversify and make sure some seeds are planted for whatever may come. And that's one of the many reasons I think Bitcoin is part of our future. But it's not only about money. Bitcoin looks to be a critical part of the next generation of technology, communications, energy, verification, and even national defense. I'd encourage everyone to do their research and do it now. And if you're convinced of the likelihood that Bitcoin is an essential part of our future, then you'll need an on-ramp. I recommend River. River empowers you to grow your portfolio without any unwanted surprises and eliminates third-party custodians, putting you in control of your assets. Open an account with no minimum purchase requirement. You can get your Bitcoin journey started with just $1. Visit partner.river.com/reasonable to create your River account today. That's partner.river.com/reasonable. Now, I know that many of you out there understand the need to diversify assets, or maybe you're looking to protect your retirement savings, but you're not quite there yet on Bitcoin, and you feel better about precious metals. I get that too. I think going in multiple directions is wise, and I do that myself. And when it comes to buying precious metals, you want to be working with a good company, and that's why I've partnered with Goldco. Goldco is a 6-time Inc. 5000 winner, 2022 Company of the Year, and they've helped people like you and me place over $2 billion in gold and silver. And I have gotten silver from Goldco. And right now they're offering my supporters up to $10,000 in bonus silver while supplies last. Don't pass this offer up. Go to reasonablegold.com now. This is your opportunity to protect you and your family from an out-of-control government before it's too late. So don't wait a second longer. Take action today. Click on the link in the podcast notes or go to reasonablegold.com now and get your free gold kit, your free IRA kit. You'll be glad you did. I hope you all are enjoying your Labor Day weekend. I will be back with a normal episode of the podcast tomorrow. But today I wanted to share an interview that I did in June of 2020 with the novelist, screenwriter, and cultural critic, Bret Easton Ellis. Bret rose to fame at a very young age with the publication of his book, Less Than Zero. That was later turned into a Hollywood film. He went on to publish the novels Rules of Attraction and American Psycho, both made into major Hollywood films, and a collection of short stories called The Informers, also made into a Hollywood film. He remains one of my favorite writers and remains a major influence not only in writing, but in how I viewed Hollywood. I came to know that town through his writing as I came to know it through reality. Now, as I said, this podcast was published in June 2020 on Bret's platform on Patreon, and you can still find it there. They've actually made that post public for my listeners. I'm going to put the link to that in the podcast description. Bret begins the episode with an hour-long monologue about the music that formed the summer memories of his past, discussing the Cars and Fleetwood Mac and Bruce Springsteen and Prince. And so if you want to hear that, click the link, head on over to his podcast. I think you'll really enjoy it. But I'm going to pick straight up with the interview. I am the host of Bret's podcast for the season premiere of his show in 2020. I hope you enjoy it. I think it held up surprisingly well. I'm Chris Paul, and I'll be hosting the Bret Easton Ellis podcast this week. I host my own show, which you may find on all platforms by searching Be Reasonable with your moderator, Chris Paul, and on social media at I'm Your Moderator. In the fall of 2002, I packed everything I owned into a 1994 Nissan Altima and left my small rural town in upstate New York after passing on a law school scholarship and began my drive across the country to Los Angeles, having never visited before. A college friend was here visiting his sister, the star of a sitcom. When I called and asked if he still thought about moving to Los Angeles, as we used to discuss in his college days, he immediately said yes, and a couple days later, his sister found an apartment for him in Encino off White Oak. I saved $800 doing manual labor restoring old homes and decided that would be enough money. I arrived in Encino after 2 consecutive 16-hour days driving. A week later, my friend and I arrived at the Halloween party at Sky Bar at the Mondrian Hotel, both dressed as Droogs from Clockwork Orange. Simple costumes, sure, but it took hours of driving around town in traffic to find the codpiece. In 2002, before cell phone cameras, social media, and digital paparazzi, real celebrities, not game show contestants, would frequent all the hotspots. Every night of the week, there was some place you had to be. After 14 months on a mattress of the living room floor in the apartment in Encino, I rented a house in Sherman Oaks with some friends, a comedian, a writer-director, a cameraman, and a web designer. We threw parties now and then, birthdays, holidays, Fridays. It turned out I had a knack for networking on MySpace, and the parties were constantly filled with pretty people of young Hollywood. One night, with the party in full swing, a club promoter I was familiar with asked me to try throwing parties in Hollywood. I did. Within weeks, I was making as much money in a night as I'd make in a week waiting tables. I never waited tables again. Anyone who surrounds themselves with good people in this town inevitably sees a few old friends become famous and successful. The more they did, the more valuable I was to the venues that would hire me. I would get paid to bring this or that young actor or model to this or that event. One Sunday morning, I arrived home with sand in my shoes, having not slept, just returning from a daybreak swim in the Pacific Ocean off the beach in Malibu with one of those actors and 2 cocktail waitress friends from a club we often went to. The cameraman was up and about, and when he came to the door to see me shaking the sand out of my shoes, he said, in a way only he can, "Glamorama, man!" I had no idea what he was talking about, and I went and slept until the afternoon. When I emerged, he was just laughing. "Glamorama, man, you're Victor Ward." "What?" I asked him. I had seen the movie American Pyscho, but I hadn't read Bret's work, and I knew nothing of Glamorama. I'd been out of college a few years and hadn't spent much time reading anything other than sports news and some books here and there. While waiting on the patio for a friend to arrive at the Coffee Bean, now closed, on 3rd and La Cienega, I began reading the first few pages, thinking, what the fuck is going on with these fucking specs? And how did I get myself into this, and is it going to be like this for 445 more pages? But I stuck with it. Within a month or so, I had devoured every word of every novel by Bret Easton Ellis. I had never come across something with such cadence and rhythm, so much dark humor in the midst of so much other darkness against a backdrop of glitter and Klieg lights. And the characters, lovable, detached, hilarious, profane, pretty, but saturated with an all-too-human ugliness. I laughed hysterically when Patrick Bateman wanted to make human sausage, but remembered he didn't know how. I still feel guilty in some way for laughing, but hey, at least I didn't write it. I first met Bret through a mutual friend at ICM who invited me to the book release party for Imperial Bedrooms, held in room 64 of the Chateau Marmont. I arrived as things were wrapping up, but our friend Nate made sure to introduce me in the lobby before they headed out to the garden for drinks and I headed out for the night. I told Bret how much his work had meant to me. It brought me back to reading novels. It brought me to writing. Bret gave me his email that night, which surprised me, but as anyone in my position would, I felt honored. We communicated sparingly over the years until a friend of mine was directing a film starring Patrick Wilson. Patrick wanted to meet Bret, so I emailed. We had dinner at, of course, the Chateau Marmont, where my friend and I, after hours of day drinking, talked about an animated pilot we had written called Surfs. Bret quickly changed the subject back to HBO's Girls, as Patrick had recently appeared on the show. I emailed Bret a few times to discuss publishing and to defend Alex Garland's Annihilation. I thought the scene at the lighthouse was one of the most profound experiences I've ever had in a movie theater. Bret disagrees. In the weeks before the lockdown, another mutual friend, the writer and showrunner Nick Pizzolatto, suggested we all have dinner. So I booked us a table in the back corner of Olivetta, a beautiful new restaurant in West Hollywood. We decided to make it a regular thing, and our second dinner, again at Olivetta, was the last time I had a proper dinner inside a restaurant in Los Angeles. Life here for the last 4 months has been quiet. I've been working on different writing projects and focusing on my podcast and some other opportunities far removed from nightlife. I go for runs when Gavin and Garcetti allow me to. I tie a bandana around my face to go to Trader Joe's. I escaped for a few days on a road trip with my girlfriend and my tiny dog Crosby to visit friends in Colorado. I zone out to NBA 2K20 on Xbox. And I've become utterly obsessed with the politics and data of the coronavirus, while the Hollywood and media elite browbeat friends and strangers about wearing masks and posting black squares on Instagram before returning to TikTok. I'm sure they're helping somehow. So, Bret, let's start here. Do you identify as Gen X? Because you're on the cusp, as the astrologers say. But beyond that, I want to know what you think of Generation X. I've been thinking a lot about formative moments for generations and how they experience them together. I remember watching the Challenger disaster in a second grade classroom, and I think, as someone born at the tail end of Gen X, that the overwhelming majority of our generation probably had the same experience. The boomers had JFK, millennials in a more splintered way had 9/11. So, Generation X.
I just want everyone to know that I wrote that. I wrote that, and I gave it to Nick. It was a bit of
an homage in style.
You read it very well. I would have read it maybe a little bit differently as I have written that, but it's fine the way it was.
I had your voice in my head the entire time.
You did. You sounded like you could actually take over this podcast. Except your monologue was far, far shorter than mine are, and really to the point.
I will tell you, though, the monologues are my favorite.
I know a lot of people think that the monologues on this podcast are really kind of what brings them in, and who cares about a guest? We were really worried, actually, after the pandemic began, because we were losing guests. Well, we lost one, and then another got shaky.
To be clear, they're not dead.
They're not dead. And the millennial I live with didn't want anyone in the apartment, and it kind of, like, who knew at
Sure.
a certain point? So I just winged it and was just talking about the season of the virus and what our experiences were here. And then we would post an old show from our podcast one days, and people really liked it. And I think we've gone up in subscriptions since this pandemic started. I also very much remember, because it was my last meal too, with you and Nick at Olivetta. And the shutdown, I think, was going to happen in about 3 days.
3 or 4 days.
Sunday.
Yeah.
It was that Sunday.
I think we went on Tuesday, yeah.
And it was, well, okay, so because the shutdown was on a Sunday night.
Yeah,
it happened that Sunday night. And so I do remember that. Yes, I was thinking about Generation X today because a friend of mine, Liliana Leak, who's been on this podcast, started her own podcast about, I think it's called Once Upon a Time in the Valley. And she had become obsessed. Lily, for those of you who don't remember, is a pretty excellent journalist. There aren't celebrity journalists. There aren't a lot of them anymore at all. In fact, most profile pieces are unreadable, and you can't read them anymore because they're just so sanctioned to death. Lily's are really, really good, and she also wrote a terrific book about Eve Babbitt's, which is what we were speaking about when she was on the podcast. That's what she was there to promote. But she has this podcast. She's been obsessed with Tracy Lords. Okay. The porn star.
Yeah.
And she has devised and written a podcast. The first 3 episodes have been released. They're each about 40 minutes long. And it is an extremely compelling look. Tracy's interviewed. Her voices are all over the place. And for those of you who don't know, Tracy Lords was kind of like the most famous porn star of the 80s. And guys thought she was incredibly hot. She was incredibly popular. She was like the biggest porn star. She was underage. And what happened was they found out about a year and a half later. I don't know for sure. I just actually read this really good book about the history of porn by Legs McNeil, and in it was like the 9/11 of porn because it kind of changed because everyone worked with her, all the producers, actresses, actors, everyone. And when it came out. Something was wrong with her identification, and people found out about it, and then there was this incredible shit show. So many people's careers were ruined, and they were pulling her tapes off of, out of porno stores and out of adult sections, and, you couldn't own one. If you owned one, it was illegal because you owned child porn. So it was a complete freak out.
My God.
And anyway, I think everyone kind of ended up... regaining their resolve and moving on with life. And, I don't know who was arrested. I don't remember the story very well, but I do know that all of the people who were involved are talking about it on this podcast. It's a produced podcast. And what I noticed is that there was a kind of Gen X coolness about this whole thing. Mm-hmm. No one crumbled into hysteria. Mm-hmm. People kind of treated it as it should be treated. Okay, let's figure this out. Let's not collapse into victimizing people. Let's not, commit suicide. Let's not, start blaming everyone. And, it was kind of a concentrated effort to figure out what we do next. So I was listening to it today, and the first thing I was thinking about while listening to this Tracy Lords podcast was, God, this is so Gen X. This is really just a kind of chill reaction to things, super sexual without being like quotation marks, and there weren't people on sets in order to make sure that the fucking was okay. Not that there are anywhere on porn sets, but it just seemed like a very
give
different
it a couple of years.
Well, right. I think in another couple of years, I think everyone will be making their own porn, and you'll be like, it'll be OnlyFans.
That could be happening right now. Yeah.
It is happening, and yet, I say that, and yet, a lot of the porn that was being produced, if you see it on Brazzers, I'm talking about straight porn. A lot of what girls liked about James Dean, a millennial porn star, different from Gen X porn star, is the fantasy aspect of it, which is kind of violent at times, and that there is something about why did James Dean, who is extremely rough with women, become the number one male porn star in the world? It's sort of like a question that a lot of people don't want to talk about or don't want to, and that's the other thing that I see happening so much right now that kind of makes me nostalgic for Gen X, and I don't know why I'm saying nostalgic, because we're here. It's just that we're small. We're a small thing, and I really do miss. I miss the irony. I miss the kind of cool attitude. I miss the accepting of nihilism and not looking at that as victimization.
Right.
I just see people just owning their own shit. And actually, now I never really thought about this, but just embracing truths. Yeah. Embracing a truth and not embracing a feel in a way. I talk about this a lot. I think about it a lot. I think Gen X has been an incredibly underrated generation because we're sandwiched in between these massive, massive millennial and boomer generation. Mm-hmm. And we're kind of just like this forgotten, stepchild in a way. And I think we are actually so much cooler than either millennials or boomers that, I don't know.
So I've talked to Nick about this before, and
Nick Pizzolatto.
Pizzolatto, yes. And so I kind of have been spinning this theory around. I don't know if you're familiar at all with Ross Douthat's The Decadent Society, talking about how American society has reached a point of decadence. And I'm now of the mind that we have spent our last 30 odd years under the total control of the baby boom generation, which was an extraordinarily decadent generation, I would argue.
Yes.
Our generation was then sort of apathetic in response. He doesn't like when I say apathetic, so that's what I want to ask you about. But then I think that it follows an apathetic age to have a revolutionary age. Like, we just accepted what things were. It was like, oh, that's bad? Okay, I guess I don't care about it. Like, that sucks. I'm registering it, but okay.
I don't think it's apathy.
A removal of some sort? Yeah. I mean, he doesn't think it is either. So
I think there's a kind of remove, a passivity, a chillness, a way of looking at things with a neutrality and not a hysteria that defines Gen X in a way. And also in terms of, I mean, look, every generation is a reaction against a previous generation. That's just how it is. Millennials are reacting against the nihilism and the Gen X's mindset in a way, just as we were rejecting the boomers in a lot of ways. We weren't just so vocal about it. We just kind of went on our own and made our own shit and our own music and all of that stuff. There wasn't the kind of active reaction against generations as millennials are now doing towards. I don't know if they really even care about Gen X. It's boomers that the real villain.
So this is the other thing I say to Nick, and I look around at the political landscape and public life, and I don't see a lot of Gen X there. Not the amount that it should be. And I think the same remove guided a lot of Gen X into saying, okay, this is how the game's played. I'm going to play it. And they go into business and they go into different things, and they don't care about government so much because there is still that remove. And the baby boomers, this huge generation, always in control. As they age, they just keep holding on to power. And so now this is what I'm writing in the new podcast, but talking about the old guard. And so I see all these problems, and these are problems that millennials complain about, that woke people complain about, all this stuff. And this isn't a hate the boomers kind of thing, but when you are in power serving your own interests for that long, it's not surprising that they don't do things like raise the age of Medicare so that the system remains solvent for everybody else, and continue the military-industrial complex. All this stuff. I look around at this stuff, and I see political parties run by boomers, media, tech, the universities, the corporations, and all of them have the same opinion. And they've all done the same bad shit together for the last 30 years. And I have started looking at Trump now as, oh, he just hates those people like he's always hated those people. And he's just trying to run them again on the world scale.
Of course. That's exactly what he's doing. And that is why you have such huge outrage in media about Trump, because that's exactly what he's trying to do. I don't think you or I have to like Trump. I don't think you're going to vote for him. I don't even know if I'm going to vote for him. But there is something about what he's doing that you just described that I find admirable. And I think it is the reason why that there is, and here we say, so much support for him in a certain way. I can't really say anything because I don't want to get into fights in LA, but I know a lot of people who, regardless of where we're at, support him. And I know gay men who support him. I know family members who support him, a lot of friends who support him. And I think that is part of the appeal. It's an abstraction.
I know black men who have opened up to the idea of voting for him just in the last 2 months.
It's all over the place. That is true. And look, if you really want to sit down and policy-wise go through everything, you can lose your mind. You can probably completely lose your mind. And if you don't find him funny, you're fucked. You're totally
if
totally
you don't
fucked.
think that stuff is funny.
What I live with is a extremely logical-minded Jew who cannot see things as abstractions, cannot experience what Trump as a movement, an idea, something that appeals to people in a kind of inchoate way.
Yeah.
And if you can't, then you're going to kind of destroy yourself and be extremely unhappy for the past 4 years. if you can locate the appeal that the other side feels about Trump, you can take a deep breath and then figure out ways how to dismantle him. But the ways that they've been going about doing it haven't really worked yet. I don't know if this is going to work, what's going on now with the pandemic and all of the crisis that is happening right now. But that was always the interesting thing about Trump, was that he was reacting against this thing that you just laid out in that question.
The old guard is what I'm
The
calling
old
it.
guard.
Yep.
And the old guard is the swamp. The old guard is the swamp. And
but people
draining
don't understand that because they think the swamp is just corruption. But
No.
But the corruption is on both sides.
It's the
and
bureaucracy
it's pervasive.
of boomer bureaucracy.
So think about this. Trump is now facing one of the biggest crises in the country's history.
Yes.
I think that's undeniable. He has not at any point, Trump the dictator, tried to seize power. And I think that is remarkable. Then I look at the old guard and I see media seizing power, tech seizing power, entertainment industry seizing power, the university seizing power, and the corporation seizing power. All of them allied with and dependent on China, who is literally trying to start World War III right now. And I look at that guy and think, okay, well, maybe this rich, bombastic asshole knows enough about who these people running things actually are, which I can 100% believe. And he said it about Hillary Clinton. I used to give her money. They used to love me, blah, blah, blah. If I was a very patriotic guy, and again, I know how I sound in Los Angeles right now, but if I was a very patriotic man who had a lot of money, had done everything you could want as a man with a lot of money already, and you saw a country that was dominated by really awful, awful people in every facet of life that can affect individual Americans, and I wanted to do something for the country, I think that is what I would do. And when the entire old guard tried to reject me, I think I would act exactly how he acts.
Yes, and I agree. And I think that what he really did ultimately do, that they did it to themselves, was he exposed the media for what they truly are. But he also kind of rebuilt the media. Not that he did it himself. They did it to themselves and destroyed themselves because of their reaction to Trump. It was sort of like the hidden monster in a horror movie, and Trump somehow found the weapon or opened the curtain that showed this tentacled, writhing thing screaming while dissolving, which is what the media is. The media, we've talked about this at length, really is a huge part of the problem. But all of those institutions you talked about are a huge part of the misery of American life right now.
Yeah. You can count ways that every one of those branches of the old guard has tried to destroy him.
Yes, they have. And I wonder sometimes if there does not exist that silent majority. Look, we could be laughing about this podcast after November 4th, whatever. But in this moment, I don't know. I still wonder. It is very, very hard to trust the media about anything now. And when the media starts throwing out these polls, numbers, and that Trump is completely underwater and Biden has it here, I don't know. I mean, it's sort of like it takes me back to October of 2016 again, and thinking, oh, well, this is all correct. This is all right. We're buying into the narrative that they've created. And I just think that people are completely sick of how they're getting their news, what's being presented to them as facts, when obviously I think it's the idea that they're putting forth out there. They're putting forth an idea. And I know that it really is. I got to tell you, I talked about this. Todd and I talk about this all the time. I used to watch Fox because I could not stand the bias on, and I know it's hilarious. But there actually seemed to be a lot less bias on Fox than there seemed to be on.
There is now. I know that's
now
terrible
there
to
is.
say, but
there is. I know,
guys. It's so strange to me that we are holding on to all of these different brands, like MSNBC as a brand. Hey, once that brand stops telling you the truth, you should act like that brand is a person and reject them from your life. True. I don't understand why these grips are still in place. I think the media is over. I think the media is completely over. I think that right now, people like myself and, a much better example would be a guy like Matt Taibbi, used to write for Rolling Stone. Now he has his own Substack. It's $5 a month.
Todd
I pay it.
Todd
wonderful.
Listen to it.
Yeah.
Yes.
If he gets a few thousand subscribers on that, he's going to make way more money than he ever did at Rolling Stone.
Of course.
And we trust him personally because we know he's going to tell us the truth. It's not through an editor. It's not through anybody else. It is Matt Taibbi. So now the media conceives of itself as a middleman or sees its future as the middleman. And so what they've changed into is a content app that supplies content for people who want that sort of liberal, I hate Trump content. And they know that those people want the content because they do the data analytics. New York Times also now sells their customer data to corporations so that they can sell things to the exact target market that they want. New York Times is a very good one. And they have now announced that they are moving into scripted entertainment. Yeah. The New York Times has 10 TV shows that they're rolling out. That's madness. Yeah. That's a content app. That's entertainment. That's not news.
Yeah. Well, that is what has been happening. And I think that I see it really in Todd more than I see it in myself. I'm a lot more older. Mm-hmm. I'm a lot more jaded. Mm-hmm. I kind of feel like I've been around the block. I trust people less at my age than Todd does at his age. Yet, the same thing happened to both of us this year. I'm on one side of the aisle, he's on another, though actually I'm pretty much a leftist libertarian if you really want to look at it. I am not Republican, I'm not conservative, I'm not Rush Limbaugh incarnate people who like to... we talk about Trump on the show, and you're not...
But they're the same about COVID now. Those same people are the exact same about COVID. They can't hear about Trump, they can't hear about COVID. Don't threaten my view.
But the same thing happened this year. Todd stopped watching MSNBC. He stopped listening to Rachel Maddow. He stopped. He couldn't. Now he does listen to Matt Taibbi, and he likes David
Taibbi's
Pakman.
awesome.
He likes a couple of other individual places where that was kind of where he gets his daily news. And the mainstream, forget it. CNN, over for him. Don Lemon, Chris Cuomo, Anderson, gone. That's gone. CNN seems to be the worst of the three, I think, and they have the worst cast of characters. MSNBC is the worst, then CNN is second worst. But anyway, yes, you're exactly. Once the news became politicized, once the media became so biased and politicized, everything went down the tubes, and that happened, I believe, starting in the summer of 2015 when Trump announced and Trump was the catalyst for it all happening. Nothing else was. Trump was the catalyst. I don't know if this would have been happening if Hillary Clinton was elected president.
I'm sure it wouldn't.
I don't think woke culture, Me Too, any of this would have happened. But the politicization of everything really got disturbing in the last 2 months about COVID and about mask wearing or not mask wearing. You really see it on social media where you can automatically tell what your friends' politics are by their status as mask wearers and them chastising. It's the chastisement of people who don't want to wear the mask that is really just awful.
But they do that about everything.
About everything, yeah. But mask wearing would be the one thing where you would think, okay, that can't possibly get politicized. But of course it can, because everything gets politicized in our big, dumb, stupid culture. And it's painful to live in. This year is a painful year to live in.
Absolutely. Yeah, this sucks.
Psychically, mentally, physically, a very painful year. And I honestly don't know where this is going to go. If this is truly going to hurt Trump, or if he's just like a cockroach and he's somehow going to rebound. And there is that silent majority that is out there. I don't know.
I feel like there's a strange groundswell right now to reject this thing. And the reason I say that is because I think that for the first time, a public event has been in our faces. Like, it is undeniable what is going on. We know people are losing jobs. We know suicide's going crazy, drug addiction, crazy. We're setting ourselves up for a terrible future. And people look at this and they say, oh, the median age of death in the United States is 80 years old for COVID. And they're like, can't we just protect them? Yeah. And that's where I'm at. So a couple weeks in, I remember 15 days to stop the spread. That was the slogan.
In March.
Right. So we did those 15 days, and then there were some more. And then I remember hearing Gavin say that they were going to, the COVID death, the first death got moved up to February 6th instead of February 29th. And so Gavin said...
Gavin Newsom, by the way.
Yeah, Gavin Newsom, sorry.
Our Patrick Bateman, governor of California.
I don't even respect him enough to use his last name.
Yes. Agreed.
He said that because of that, and the death lag, of course, with how long it takes from when you get the virus to when it kills you, that they were going to have the coroners review all the deaths in California for flu-like illness through December. And so that tells me, well, you're not going to put resources towards something like that unless you have a pretty good idea that that's the situation. And then I say to myself, okay, well, that means we already lived for 3.5 to 4.5 months without lockdown, without masks, knowing the virus is in the country. So it either doesn't spread like people think it does, or it doesn't kill like people think it does, or both.
I think that there is something that the press cannot hide, and that is that for the last 2 weeks now, as the death rate went from, I think, 130 to 137 now, 138,
right,
that instead of the kind of rush of quote-unquote horror, how quickly 120,000 died or 125,000 died, that it seems to be leveling off. The media won't play it that way.
No.
It's breaking news. The horror, you hear it on, if you turn on the mainstream media, or if you look at the New York Times, which I still do, I don't know why. Every day I want to cancel it. It is a shocking paper to
Barry
read.
Weiss thing?
It's a shocking thing to read. And so I think that how much more can they repeat this? 136,000 dead, they said, for a week. 100, they
always new cases.
The media wants this thing to play out to where we have 1 million dead. I believe that. I believe there is something fundamentally immoral in how they are pushing this story.
I agree.
And it's all there to make Trump look bad. That is the background here. It's absurd.
They are telling us a story that they filter through the lens of, does this or does this not help Trump?
God, we're going to lose so many listeners.
And CNN has taken their COVID counter off the screen now because the deaths are not increasing quickly enough.
Right, exactly. They're not. And then, so that's what's being taken off. So getting back to that notion is, will people see through the bullshit? I mean, will people finally see through this and go, the narrative they're pushing isn't true?
I think that's why people's minds are cracking, because they're seeing the truth in their face and it doesn't add up to the truth they're being told and that they're telling themselves.
And I think other listeners, I don't think either Chris or myself are voting for Trump. We're just talking about what's going on right now and how we see it. So if you're going to come in and think that this is, or listening to this and you're thinking there's some kind of partisan thing going on, there's not. It's really amazing how Todd and I have gotten so much closer in the aisle of the theater than we were originally because of exactly what we're talking about. He sees this too.
Yeah.
He knows this is bullshit. And he is a super hardcore left guy who's a little Bernie socialist. And even he can't deal with it and ridicules it.
Yeah, I'm not intending to vote for Trump, although I am open to it depending on how the next 3 months play out. I was a loud and vocal Hillary supporter. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. I was thinking about the context of movies and what we might talk about. And I was thinking about how you enjoyed, obviously, reviewing movies and your admiration for Pauline Kael. And I was thinking about what it would be like to look back on old movie reviews and to use those as some sort of time capsule for what the culture was actually like. Because sure, it talks about the movie, but it's talking about it in a context of a time and place and a political environment. And I think that I will not do it myself, but someone should do a history as viewed through movie reviews.
Well, I guess someone could. I mean, what makes Pauline Kael so great and timeless was her style. Her style sold everything. She wasn't necessarily a political critic in any way whatsoever. She was really into, and I'm not saying you said that. I mean, sure, she called Straw Dogs a fascist work of art. She sometimes used fascist as a term, but very, very rarely was she political. And actually, she mostly disliked the soggy liberal prestige movies that came out of Hollywood. She was really against that. She liked horror, she liked comedy, she liked foreign pictures. And I think it's interesting if you read her two key collections of the 70s, they do give you a sense of the history of Hollywood at that point. It does start at one place in the New Hollywood in 1970, where one of her famous essays was where she counted all of the movies she saw in the last 2 years, and it is from The Godfather to A Clockwork Orange to MASH, McCabe, it is a an astounding list of new Hollywood masterpieces. And then at the very end of the decade, in 1980, after she'd been out in Hollywood, where she worked here for 9 months before being fired and had to go back to the New Yorker, she wrote a piece called The Numbers, or Why Are Movies So Bad, in the spring of 1980. And it really did end that fast. It really did, that moment. And so if you read these 2 or 3 books of hers that just contain her reviews from 1970 and then all the way to 1980, that is a history of Hollywood. It's a fascinating history of Hollywood.
Well, it's a history of the culture, too. You could extract the culture out of those reviews, I would imagine.
Well, it's even more interesting, though, unfortunately, her reviews didn't get more interesting as movies stopped getting more interesting. She was really as interesting as the movies were. And so her reviews of the movies of the 80s, and Tarantino, and I have talked about this before, is that when corporations took over Hollywood and really started making the big decisions, the movies changed. And when agents started taking over the Hollywood, when the Mike Ovitzes started taking over, and the Michael Eisners started taking over, and this kind of mindset came into movie making, packaging, and things like that, her reviews are really, really withering, whether she's talking about Flashdance or Legal Eagles, which was probably the most infamous CAA package that happened in the mid-'80s, a Robert Redford, Deborah Winger comedy that I think Ivan Reitman directed. That was just like, why? Even Ivan Reitman, who I talked about this, he said, I don't know why we're doing it. We're all just making so much fucking money. I couldn't believe what I got on Legal Eagles. So anyway, it's interesting to see how everything kind of falls apart in the 80s for her. It's just that the reviews aren't as interesting because the movies aren't as interesting. But she is, I mean, I don't know anyone else who's really done that. And I don't know necessarily who is qualified now to do that, who writes as well about movies to do that. I like Wesley Morris at the New York Times. I think he's a pretty good film critic. And I have to say Tony Scott and Manohla Dargis are pretty good too. They do work for the New York Times, and you can see a bias in their reviews sometimes. They lean toward a certain kind of movie that might not be as good as it is just because of what it's about. I just don't know if we have those people who are as passionate about writing about film and talking about film. And who can blame them? Who can blame them? I mean, movies are, what they are.
So movies and writing, I consider you on some level a pretty subversive writer. I don't know if you would think the same. But what would you consider the most subversive movie that you've seen? And you don't have to even enjoy it.
Just most subversive movie. Well, I have to say, in so many ways, I want to go straight to The Godfather. And I want to say that The Godfather is because The Godfather was really the first American movie that had this European sensibility melding in with all of the cliches and the tropes of the gangster picture that originated in Hollywood in the 20s and the 30s. And it was the first time that, I guess, is Coppola a boomer? I consider him a boomer. He's probably from the silent generation or whatever, but mainly working as a boomer, I guess, with a boomer mentality. But The Godfather, applying a kind of European artistry to pulp material and a pulpy, kind of trashy, huge bestseller by Mario Puzo, and deciding to create a work of cinematic art from that was a pretty subversive thing to do. And it was very surprising that kind of artistry was applied. Certainly Paramount didn't think that was going to happen. Paramount, who bankrolled the movie, thought, this is a violent shoot-'em-up. Let's get it. It's about the fall of a Don and his son taking over the company in his own ruthless way. So that's often my go-to. I think probably Psycho is another. I think that, for obvious reasons, killing off the leading lady in the first half of the picture, and in such a horrible way, was truly subversive then in 1960. I don't know. It's harder and harder to be subversive now in ways. It seems that everything's been done. I've been watching a couple of recent horror movies, and they just seem I don't know. I mean, they go far, but still, when you're kind of exhausted in ways, there's got to be new ways to find how to scare audiences, I guess. I would say those are two that I think about a lot. Was there anything that you were particularly thinking about?
No. I just wanted to get your take on it because I thought you would be the sort of cultural observer that might have a good answer.
Well, look, a lot of people might say Star Wars is an incredibly subversive movie because it took what was considered a very kind of tacky genre for kids and then elevated into A-list art. And I think that's what a lot of the movie brats of the 1970s did. They elevated the genre movies that they loved as children into high-end works of art, whether it's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, whether it's Jaws, whether it's The Exorcist, The Godfather. These are hardcore genre pictures and genre situations that really a European influence came into play and began to affect that decade.
J.K. Rowling came out on Twitter recently, and I don't remember what the tweet is, and I don't care, and I am not interested in discussing any trans issues. But she did not get canceled, or at least not successfully. And, you know, people make the joke that all you have to do is be a billionaire best-selling author to not get canceled. But I don't think that's it. And I don't think that you could be canceled. Obviously, Joe Rogan can't be canceled.
I think I have been canceled, but anyway.
Well, if you have, then you're already post-cancel. Okay. So they already have done their worst to you, which I would totally agree with, and you can speak to that too. But I'm wondering what you think about the notion that the solution to cancel culture is simply not apologize.
Of course it is. It always has been that way. And that is the first rule of cancel culture: is you don't apologize. You don't legitimize
terrorists.
You don't legitimize it, right?
Yeah.
And I do think that there is something about being rich that protects you. And I do think that J.K. Rowling, who's probably worth, I don't know, $1 billion, £1 billion, or whatever it is she's worth, that does protect you in a way. And I do talk to people who don't have any money who say, God, I wish I was fucking rich as hell so I could like put this opinion out there. But I have a family to feed and I'm afraid I'll be canceled or I'll lose my job or something like that. That is a terrible place to live. This is a terrible country and culture to live like that. I think you're right about not apologizing. I do think that there are degrees of cancellation, and I think that there has been over my career degrees of cancellation. Certainly many people thought I was canceled after American Psycho, and then there was this big thing that I heard people whisper, he'll never work again. No one will ever give him another contract because this was such a disaster. He's not touchable. He's poison. And I just think you have to live your life, and you have to do and ignore it to a degree. Easier for me because I'm single, I don't have kids, I don't have to, or I'm not divorced, I don't have to pay alimony, whatever. I'm kind of autonomous, and I don't really work with corporations. I'm not really working in Hollywood at all. I guess you could go after my publishers if I did something especially egregious. But I often wonder if they are going to start going after writers who wrote things 30 years ago. And I mean, I think they're doing that already. I think the curriculum, I mean, in terms of like certain in universities and in academia, has tried to push the white male author out of the stage and replace it with something more diverse, something more progressive, something that's somehow sort of representative, whether it's as good or not as whatever, Melville or Dickens or Thackeray or whoever it might be. That's also going on in all aspects of the culture as well. Representation being this thing that people are so obsessed with, but it really isn't so representative if you really look at the statistics and who is what, who makes up what part of the population, and all of this stuff. There now seems to be a kind of overrepresentation in a lot of areas, and that's something interesting to talk about. I remember that I wrote a piece for the Hollywood Reporter last year at Oscar time about how interesting it was that I think everyone who was going to win an Oscar that year is playing a gay or bisexual character. and that was the year of Bohemian Rhapsody, him winning, Olivia Colman winning, and Mahershala Ali for playing the gay doctor in Green Book. And then I talked about how this is over-representation of gay life, because basically, if we're 4% of the population, then the Oscars are actually over-representing what we amount to.
Even with one nominee.
Absolute dead. I mean, I've never been asked to write again for them by pointing this out. And then I also said that I was afraid that The Silence of the Lambs would never get made today in this kind of culture.
For sure.
And that what is getting made? And then that was the other question. I mean, a kind of well-meaning, satisfyingly diverse, representative version of progressivism. I mean, again, re-education camp art is what we seem to be edging toward. And I don't know. I mean, I think it's very dangerous in this moment to be an artist and to be someone who wants to express themselves however they would like to, and that you have been allowed to for decades and decades and decades in this country. And corporate culture is a big part of why that's being shut down, because they're afraid. They're afraid, and it's all about money. It's all about money.
I see this decentralization that I was talking about with the media happening in other forms of entertainment. And I think maybe movies, because of the barriers to entry, like the cost and the locations and whatnot, that's going to be a harder one to decentralize. But I can imagine the novel being decentralized. Podcasts are doing well. There's just less dependence on that. And I think right now, you've got the more totalitarian the cultural idea becomes, the more corporate art will be propped up, and people will believe that is what art does.
Absolutely.
And that they will try to make art to serve the corporation, which of course is not art. And I expect, honestly, I actually find optimism in what's going on right now, because this thing was happening already, but no one was actually forced physically to be decentralized physically.
Right.
So it is making actual people who are creative find new outlets and new forms of expression for themselves.
True.
And I think that'll continue. I mean, I imagine amazing music's getting made right now. I don't know. But I'm hopeful that there will be this decentralized kind of punk rock movement where independent art retakes the mantle that it should have.
But I have to say that that's all very well and fine. That's all very well and good. That is. That's a nice
I'm
nice
optimistic
dream
about few things.
It's a nice dream. But part of what really made so much of mid-century empire art so fantastic is the means you had to make it. Whether it was great records, great movies, whether it was the money you gave to an author, whatever it was, there was something about the ambition and the epic quality of so much of the art of the empire that I don't know. I mean, I think spectacle is a huge part of why art works, and I've realized that it's now moved into TV. It's kind of gone from movies unless it's in Marvel, but in TV, spectacle is now being something that's supposed to lure a viewer in. Mm-hmm. That wasn't the case about 10 or even 5 years ago. And so I think that there's a yearning for that. I don't know if there's a yearning so much for a kind of bare-bones, independent, DIY level of movie or music or book. I think there's always going to be a need for bigness, something bigger than us, like a bigger record, a bigger band, a bigger movie. And that is where the pleasure comes in. I think part of the widespread attraction to one of Gen X's key figures, Quentin Tarantino's movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, was that it was built on an epic level with movie stars and also a very personal work of art. And I think that was probably the most talked about movie that year. Everyone kind of went to see it. And I think exactly because of those qualities. I grew up, I lived through the first punk explosion. very few survivors. Very few stuff from that era is listenable. It was all very exciting. And I know I'm kind of veering away from what you're saying.
No.
But also, I don't know, the same thing with, it's damned if you do and damned if you don't. I think gatekeepers, to a degree, are essential in certain aspects of the art. Whether it was the old-time studio head whose own gut sense of movies and what we're going to make, what we're not going to make, was kind of an important reason why there were 100 great films in the 70s. I think that's true with publishing houses. We're going to go with this writer. We're not just going with any writer because they happen to hit all the marks of diverse, progressive, whatever. Quality. Kind of quality. I think the same is true in the great albums that were made in Empire. That there was a lot of money and a lot of careful concessions being made about this act or grooming this person for that. Now, I agree with you. We're in a place right now where that's just not happening. There isn't. No one's going to be making a Tusk by Fleetwood Mac or a Hotel California, and certainly no one's making a movie as ambitious as The Godfather or even something as The Deer Hunter or whatever. Those days are gone. No one's going to allow anyone to make Apocalypse Now. That's just not where we're at. So I think we adapt, and I think, for example, right now, I have the bane of my existence on this podcast from the very first one that we recorded. We're talking about how movies still are better than TV, and that TV will never subsume movies. Ad infinitum, I went on about this endlessly.
I remember it.
And it happened. It happened. And now TV is better than movies. And there's so much better stuff on TV than you can find in movies. And most of the movies now that I watch are just little wisps of ideas, even the kind of good ones that have gotten nice reviews, like Palm Springs, the Andy Samberg movie, The Vast of Night, which was a little fly-speck movie that a lot of people loved. TV is no longer that. TV has to sell something bigger now because I think there's so much competition, because there's now 12,000 shows to choose from. And also, I do think one of the things that I'm hopeful about in this wave, this oceanic wave of content, is the notion that maybe you can try anything. Maybe you can just do whatever you want, and there is freedom in that.
And that's punk rock.
And that is punk rock to a degree, right? And that's the punk rock that I'm looking for. But I see it really affecting this whole notion of representation taking over quality to a degree, and that is alarming. And I think it's happening in all of the arts. I think it's happening in publishing. I think it's happening in the art world. I mean, it's something. Now, look, I'm not saying white people are victims, and I'm not saying whatever. But there does seem to be the angle has shifted. It's not just about the art anymore. It's about who makes the art.
I agree. So let me just push back for a second with the decentralization thing, because you talk, I love the empire theory. I think I understand it pretty well. If we view that sort of gatekeeper as a birth of the empire, right? I mean, or maybe it was always around, but it stopped. Maybe that's when it stopped. Who knows? If the old guard goes away, if people like Taibbi are able to charge for what they do and they get enough fans and subscribers, whatever, it seems to me that because he already has an established name for himself.
You're talking about Matt Taibbi. Right.
Yeah. It seems to me like because people's behaviors are changing, that our idea of who the gatekeepers are is going to change. And that we will have personal gatekeepers who we know are honest. It's like the old, people talk about the old way that record stores used to be. You would go in, the guy at the record store would tell you what to check out if you liked that, right? So I see a different kind of gatekeeper emerging. And so now I want to ask you this. Like, if you were to write a novel right now, if you were to publish it yourself and put it online for $100, you could probably get the same amount of people to buy your book.
Maybe or maybe more.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe more.
So I believe, or at least I see a potential for this, that, when you think about selling a book and you go on your book tour and they market your book and all of that, some of that will scale back for sure. But it's totally possible that if you hired a manager, that person could book a tour for you on a salary, not as a commission on your book. Pay them. They'll book the tour. You go on the tour. You sign your books. You advertise your own book because all your fans are already following you. And then the other influential fans that you have will say, oh, my God, Bret released this book. This book is amazing. You have to get this book. I still think there's a place for that. And I think that the gatekeepers will become the consensus of the people we respect.
I think people have tried that. I think Stephen King even tried it. It didn't work.
I'm sure that you're right about that.
It did not work. Now, look, I now tell people who are writing novels to self-publish.
Yeah.
I do tell them that.
Told me that.
And I think that that is really, for new writers now, in terms of how the publishing world is set up, the way to go. Because it's just not going to work out in terms of mainstream publishing. Now, what a mainstream publisher does, and that you can't really get anywhere else, is that you automatically make the money because you assign the advance. 80% of the time, you don't make it back for them. So the ratio of profitability in publishing is about 20% of books make their money back. 80% of them don't. And often that's because the publisher's overpaid for the book, which is what the agent wants the publisher to do because it's such a fucking crap game. Of course the agent wants to protect the writer. I have had books not earn out because of certain advances, and then I've had books earn out because people like them or whatever. The amount of work that goes into all the things that you're talking about, I don't want to do. I can imagine a writer wanting to do that and having the patience to do that, but it's kind of like the reason why some people have a manager and some people don't have a manager. I have a manager because I don't want to make those fucking phone calls, and it is worth it for the 10% he's going to get to make those calls, to deal with those people, and I feel better knowing that. I know other people go, "Are you crazy? You're giving him 10% of whatever," and I said, "That's just me." Yeah. So everyone is different, but I do think that what a publisher does is it gives a kind of a sign of approval to something. It justifies something in a way. And when they make a beautiful glossy hardcover, it's supposed to entice you as a work of art that you're supposed to pick up. And then going through the runs of it, you understand it. It's not only publishing the book, it's getting it to reviewers. It's setting up, increasingly rarely, tour scheduling. It's dealing with all of this vast amount of shit. And when you look at book contracts for publishers, that's why you have an agent. That's why you have an agent. They're like, how can I even read this? So it's sort of like all of that stuff is taken care of by other people because you don't want to fucking deal with it. If I had to deal with all the stuff that you're suggesting,
I don't think you have to deal with anything. Just write it and
just put it on and download it on my Bret Easton Ellis thing for $10.
No.
See who does it.
No. You write the book, only sell the hard copy, only, and charge $100 for it. Make it like that Wu-Tang album.
Who am I going to... I don't want to make a hard copy of my book. I don't want to go to the trouble.
Well, you don't have to do it by hand.
It just seems like... that seems like a game to a degree. I mean, you also want to... I mean, on a certain level, yes, writing a novel is personal, but your publisher wants to reach as many people as possible.
But those people aren't there in the market anyhow, so why not just reach your people?
Well, look, that is true. There is the profitability for an author with a book is pretty much around, you get about 10 to 12% of each copy sold.
By the way, didn't E.L. James get into this business that way? Wasn't she a
self-published
fan fiction author?
She self-published,
right.
And she got a following. And then Random House made her an offer for the 50 Shades of Grey books. And they were the ones who published it and made her a wealthy woman. What she was doing online wasn't doing much of anything. It got her a following that got Random House interested.
Right.
And that has happened. That has happened. But, it's a crapshoot. First of all, you got to realize anyone who thinks about going into publishing to make money is wrong. It is not, and it's always been that way. Right. It has always been that way. There might have been a time in the 50s and the 60s, into the 70s, and even into the 80s, where your average midlist writer, along with his advance for his book and a teaching gig and writing essays, could kind of make it, could eke it out. Now, that's just simply not possible. And I think that we're going to be a long way away from the kind of advances that you would hear about even 10 years ago for certain books. Though, of course, something like American Dirt, she did get a pretty large advance for that book, and there was a lot of controversy over that. So if you work with a major publishing house, it's basically 40%, 40%, 45, 45 split between the publisher and the bookstore. Now, when your work is being digitized, you will gain a lot more of that money for each book sale because there's no middleman. So you get 40%, 45% of that. So that is, in a way, an improvement. But look, you're talking to someone much older who has had the system work for him in a way. Also has not had it not work for him. But I don't know if I could ever. I understand what you're saying. Until someone does that and it really works, I don't think anyone's going to do it.
Well, that should be you because you know your fans would support it. But let's get off of that. Can you give us a quick novel update?
You know, it's very interesting, the novel update. I have been thinking about this particular novel, for many, many, many years, 20 years, about something that happened my senior year in high school, something that happened to us, a group of us, kind of a terrible thing. And I never figured out a way how to write about it. And still, I am writing about it. It's autobiographical, but it is a novel. It is a piece of fiction. And so short, I hope relatively short. And I think I finally got the outline down. And my goal was, earlier in this year, especially when the pandemic started in March, that, okay, I'm going to write it now, and I'm going to finish it by the end of summer. This is not going to be a years in the making book. I don't have the time. I don't want to do that. This is not that kind of book. I'm not interested in that kind of book. I'm not interested in 8 years on Glamorama, which I gladly was when I was in my 30s, or 3 years on American Psycho, or 5 years on Lunar Park. So this, I hopefully will get this book done by the end of the year, but I am a slow writer. I am a slow fiction writer. And it's not because I'm proud. It's just because I'm maybe overly conscious about style. And it's kind of like a painting in a way. And I want the words to look a certain way, and I want my narrators to sound a certain way. And I do test runs of chapters in their voice to see if it really works, or if it seems fake, or if it's not what they would sound like. I've done test runs on this book. I've already done them, and I am pretty much fine with this voice. And so that is where the book is. And I'm hoping by the end of the year to have a draft done, and have the final draft done. So that's where I'm at.
So when you say you're slow, is that a matter of process? It's just a matter of care? Or do you go off and on a lot? Like where you'll have some days where you're very on, and then it just isn't clicking and you put it aside?
Of course. Yeah. Always. Usually, as you get near the end, you're working every day, and you're working longer hours because you're excited, and you see it coming. You see things start announcing themselves.
And
to
books
you.
often read that way as well.
Yeah.
It kind of it's a downhill shoot. I think I've told you before, less than zero, the last 30 pages of less than zero are gone in 2 seconds for me.
Yeah. Look, I care a lot, and I'm sure a lot of writers would say that. A lot of writers, I don't know. I mean, I wish I was that writer. I wish I had Chuck Palahniuk's, ability to put a novel out every year. I wish that I could write faster, but it's just not been the way it is for me, and I can't. But sure. There's some. For example, today I haven't worked on the book.
But you're on like a kind of everyday thing right now?
I was, and now a couple of other projects came up, and I'm dealing with those. One is a literary project I'm writing for Audible, a book to be listened to, and that's whatever it is, and that suddenly came in this week, and we were fooling around with that. But no, I haven't, and I want to get. Even I think this weekend I'll be going back to it in at least 3 or 4 days, really seeing how far I can go. I mean, the first section of the book is written, about 10,000 words, and then that's all kind of a setup, and then I want to start getting to. It's told from now. I mean, the narrator's looking back on what happened in 1981, and then now let's go. Let's start at that first scene in 1981 and do it. It's pretty much outlined. It's all beginning, middle, and end is there, and it's pretty concise. I don't want to overwrite it. I want it to say simple and fast, and well, we'll see where it goes. But I haven't had an idea for a novel in, look, Lunar Park was in many ways the last really big, full-fledged idea I had for a novel. Imperial Bedrooms came out of a midlife crisis. That I was having, and it wasn't something that I particularly wanted to write, but I had to write it. It was one of those things that just had to get out of me. Didn't mean it had to be published. It didn't mean that it had to go out there, but it had to be written. And once it was written, there was no way my publishers were not going to publish it. And I like Imperial Bedrooms because it's so simplistic. The writing is so simple. I have a very hard time going through my older books. I really have difficulties. And I thought I signed off on them when I thought they were done, and I thought they were pretty perfect for what I want. And now I want to take a pen.
Of course. You'll always rethink that.
Yeah, and for some reason I don't feel that way at all with Imperial Bedrooms because it's just almost it's so bare bones, and there's something about it that haunts me. But that could be because of what it was tied into with my real life.
So I have 4 favorite writers. One of them is you. One of them is our good friend Nick Pizzolatto. The other 2 are Joan Didion and Michel Houellebecq. But since I've never met the 2 of them, let's talk about Nick.
Nick Pizzolatto, everyone, is the creator of True Detective. We should actually put this out there so you know who we're talking about.
Yes.
And he, I guess, has he written all 3 seasons?
He's written all 3 seasons. I believe he's directed a couple episodes.
But he is the one, because I know season 1 is everyone's favorite. That was his baby. That was Nick's show all the way. He wrote it. He didn't direct it.
He did not direct it, but he had a lot of input into the process. So Nick used to get a lot of heat after that first season of True Detective. They said that because the show was about cops going after pedophiles who hurt young girls, that it was misogynistic, that one of the main characters wasn't a woman, even though Woody Harrelson had a wife who was very prominent in the show. So it was misogynistic for that as well. It was not enough, I guess, black representation. Then, and I look at this stuff, all these complaints, these cultural complaints about what I believe is the best TV show in the last however many years. I don't know.
Pretty good.
Maybe it's one of my favorites ever. I mean, I think season 1 of True Detective might be the best season of television I've ever watched. But he got all that shit. And then I sit back, I've watched them again now with my immigrant Mexican girlfriend, and because she's never seen it. So I'm not only, watching it over again with her, but I'm making sure that I am attuned enough to be able to explain everything that's happening in a careful enough way to make sure that she gets it all.
Well, you're also re-experiencing it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's both. And I'm viewing it through the cultural lens now. And season 1, like I just said, has a main female character, 2 incredible characters. I mean, to insult that work on a basis of representation is utterly moronic to me.
Anything is utterly moronic to base any...
So second season, he has a female lead, a gay character.
Well, I mean, when I look back on season 2, I only remember Vince Vaughn and Colin Farrell.
Sure.
Who was the lead
Taylor
female?
Kitsch. Oh, the lead female? Rachel McAdams.
I remember the male stories in that much more than I remember the female story. I don't think Rachel McAdams had such a... And she had some of the dumber stuff in that season. I like season 2.
I do too.
And I know a lot of people put the show down, but I really like season 2. I understand what some people's problems were, but I kind of liked those things. And I thought it was kind of scary, and it went into a weird, dark place, almost darker than the first one in some ways. And so I liked it. But I don't remember Rachel McAdams in there. And I don't know what it means if Nick can or cannot write a female character.
Oh, no. I mean, I'm not questioning that. It's just funny.
Who was the female character in the 3rd season?
The 3rd season...
It's men, too.
Well, there's 2 men who are the cops.
Right.
But Mahershala Ali's wife in the show...
I don't even remember her.
Very prominent. Great part. It was a beautiful part.
He plays 3 different versions of himself, right? in three
Ali
different
does,
time
and
sections.
so does
Stephen Dorff.
Stephen Dorff.
You know what? I don't care. First of all, a corporation made it, and they thought this was going to appeal to their audience. Let people whine and bitch. And I don't think HBO is saying that. People outside are saying it, and it really is, I think, a small woke mob.
They're just so dangerous.
Well, they are to a degree. They can be. And I wonder if that has changed the way people are now creating shows. And they're thinking about this. But, I don't know. I mean, I've seen a lot of television this year that is... Sometimes you can tell when they're being progressive just to be progressive to a degree, but a lot of shows are basically white. It's not as if we have a completely... there's a rainbow of diversity. I mean, there's a lot of white shows. Now, there are a ton of black-themed shows. There's more gay shows than I thought would be on. So I don't know. I just think when you hear that kind of complaint about something like True Detective, you just kind of shrug and you move on. The danger is when the corporation begins to think that an artist has to follow 20 rules in order to get a show on. It can't just be the artist's way of thinking. I'm dealing with a show... Someone wants me to get involved in this show, and it seemed to me that the creator of the show really, against his own natural talent, created a show to just sell it. Which, of course, that's what many, many people do, because it's hard to sell a show and whatever. I think we're now in a place, and when I have my meeting with these people, for some reason they want my opinion or consultation, is to really, I think we're at a place now where you can, I think, do more what you want to do than follow the tired TV tropes that everyone has in terms of, here are these 7 characters, and he's funny, he's dark, she's a bitch, he's the gay best friend. All of these things, I think, are being pushed aside for a different kind of show, and I don't think you need to sell shows like that anymore, or you shouldn't. They should be more reliant on visuals. I think visual storytelling in TV now can go anywhere, and it should be encouraged, because the pitter-pat of TV talk can be exhausting. And when you have a show that is just dependent on dialogue-driven scenes between 2 people and then 2 other people, then 2 other people, it's just like, I think we can get over that, and we should concentrate on more visual TV storytelling. But it's so interesting that you mentioned Joan Didion and Michelle Houellebecq, both whom I've met, both who I also like a lot. I think Michelle Houellebecq is probably the greatest living European novelist. The last couple of books have been minor, but he's gotten older. I don't know. He's not really batting it out of the park with his masterpieces, a trio of masterpieces that he made mid-career. But it's very interesting because, here he's kind of jeered at and ignored by the mainstream press. Now he is
very dangerous in terms of the culture of relative safety that we have.
Well, in France, he sells 600,000 hardcovers in a week.
Wow.
And Joan Didion, I still can't shake her off as an influence. And sometimes.
And why would you?
No, I know. I mean, that's an empire career. I mean, what a glorious career to have that much influence, to be that good of a writer, and to to get that kind of reputation. And I mean, I was thinking the same thing I was reading a book about Mike Nichols. It's kind of an oral history of Mike Nichols. There's not going to ever be another Mike Nichols. There's just the culture doesn't function in that way anymore. It doesn't allow for someone like that to make those kind of movies, to direct those kinds of plays, to become rich while doing so, and retaining his kind of intelligence and cultural cachet, whatever. But you mentioned I keep thinking about that particular time because they were both. Joan Didion and Mike Nichols were both overlapping the time that their careers were really moving ahead.
What is your favorite part of Didion's style? Because for me, one thing that I really take away from her writing is the way that she is able to use setting to communicate so much culturally about the characters.
Vital.
There's the life of what's happening in her book, and then there's also an entirely separate life that you can know by reference, it feels like, that's happening outside of it.
It's magic. I mean, it really is. That's you can't be taught that. Mm-hmm. That can't be taught to you. You just have to innately feel that and be able to express it. And I think that's part of the magic of Joan Didion is her feeling for locale and setting. And then once you get that down, anything can happen. I feel that's the same way with movies and TV. I think I don't give a shit about characters. I don't care about story. I absolutely don't. Those are like 6th and 7th down on my list. I care about the world that you're putting these characters in. You have to build a world that is authentic and believable enough for me, and then go and tell your story. But unless you have that atmosphere and you have that mood and you have that world, I really don't care. It's tone. Style is the most important thing. And I think
that's a minority opinion, isn't it?
It is. I'm sure it is. But I think that's something that Joan Didion does because her books aren't populated, especially, I mean, I'm talking right now about her fiction, aren't populated by particularly likable women. They're kind of space cadets. She's attracted to that. I don't know if you saw the really bad Netflix movie, The Last Thing You Wanted, which was based on her novel, her last novel. She's incredibly hard to translate to movies, and it's only been done twice. The Last Thing You Wanted and Played As It Lays, which was made into a very iffy, weird movie from 1970. But I don't know. She's 85 now, 86. I see her on Instagram sometimes. Griffin Dunn posts pictures.
Oh, wow.
And it's that whole world is gone. I mean, it just was such an amazing empire world that she was a part of.
Do you think, I've been looking back on the White Album and on her essay, which you'll remember the name of, and I probably won't, the Haight-Ashbury in the 60s.
Slouching Towards Bethlehem.
That was actually, I knew that was in that book, but that was, okay.
That was the title of the essay.
That was what I was hanging up on there. So I think about what those characters of those essays,
I do too.
Who they were.
They are.
Those are now the people running our world.
Yes, and I have to say they're more. Well, you're talking about the burned out hippies of the Slouching Towards Bethlehem.
Well, not quite, but yeah.
Well, I guess you're right to a degree, but she was also of that age when she went down to write that piece. And she went in with a kind of an exploratory quality. And so Joan Didion wrote this famous piece called Slouching Towards Bethlehem, kind of made her name. I think it was published in Life in 1968 or so, and it became the centerpiece of her book. And it really was a devastating portrait of hippie culture and of the summer of love. And it really just exposed this kind of aimless, drug-addled, lost city of children in a way that a lot of people hated her for. She really kind of pricked the balloon, the happy rainbow balloon that was flying over. And that
is what we need.
It ends
right now,
and it ends famously when she's in kind of a loft with some hippies, and she's talking to a 5-year-old child who's just dropped acid. The parents are just giving the kid acid. When Didion was asked about this, what did you feel when you were witnessing this? She said, gold. I got gold. That's what happened. I got gold as a reporter. She has the best piece ever written about the Central Park jog is called Sentimental Education. I think it's called Sentimental Educations in After Henry. That it's just a brilliant, the only person who really got the Central Park 5 case down right, and that's the main piece in her collection After Henry. Probably the most influential writer that I've ever come across, and it just is so weird how that just happens. It just is like someone gave me a book and I read it, and I've read a lot of other books before. Why did this one suddenly? And I still am a reader. I have like 2 or 3 novels going all the time, or a collection of short stories. I know it's harder, I think, for people as they get older to sustain an interest in fiction. I hear this from a lot of people. I don't know why I'm able to still, and when I get a really good novel, I'm able to just slip into it. It's hard to find. They are hard to find. And I often do not finish novels. I get midway through. I was reading one just the other day by Julian Barnes, who had his last book. Very good setup, very interested, moves very fast, and then about midway through, it was just like, oh, why did you have to go here? And your style isn't as interesting enough, and your narrator isn't as interesting enough to keep me going. However, I am having a revelatory moment with The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. My French publisher is doing a reprint of it, and they wanted me to do an introduction.
Fantastic.
And I thought, really? I mean, I like the movie a lot. I think the movie is pretty great. At least the original version and not the fucked up version where freaking added all that shit in and the terrible, terrible ending. But I thought, that's not a good book. That's not going to be a good book. It surprisingly is. And it was a bestseller. It was written to be a bestseller. It came out in 1971. And I thought, I can't stop turning the pages. It's written in such an easy style, and it's effortless to read. You understand why that book sold 10 million copies. It was the number one bestseller, I think, of 1971. Of course it was. Now, it's not great literature. William P. Blatty was not even that good of a writer. But just knowing how to keep the prose flowing, the characters moving, the situation gliding forward, I'm kind of in awe of it. You rarely see these kind of books anymore. And so that's something else I'm reading. And then I'm reading this book, a British book from the first 10 years of the century. It's called The Old Wives' Tale by Anthony Bennett. And it's really, really good. It's kind of like 600 pages, social realism set in the English countryside about a woman and her two daughters and whatever. Anyway. So and what are you reading?
I have listened to a couple audiobooks.
Anything you recommend?
Nonfiction.
Anything you'd recommend?
No, right now, to tell you the truth. I mean, I listened to on audiobook, what is it called? The Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt. And it is very good. But I also then, while going through it, realized that I already knew the whole book from having read reviews of it and having listened to him on podcasts.
Right. Any movies?
You know what?
This is the real stumper.
Yeah, I really have not been watching stuff. I showed my girlfriend Fight Club because she'd never seen that.
What did she think of Fight Club?
She enjoyed it. It's like a fun romp, you know.
Yeah. It's both.
People hate that movie. Nick, I know, hates that movie. I kind of like it.
I kind of like it too.
I have absolutely no problem with it, and it's relatively subversive, I think.
It is. It is subversive. I understand when people think it's not. I understand when Dennis Cooper calls it retarded.
It's too easy to do that for me, I think. Like, I think it's easy for people to do that, but like, you can't deny the effect.
I think there's so much quality and style in that movie that you can't either. That it's about that. It's so much about the surface tension of the film and its gleaming nihilism, I guess you would call it, that it's very hard to shake off. It's powerful. I watched it recently because I was having Chuck on the podcast, and I hadn't seen it since I think it came out in 1999. Yeah, I was just first of all shocked that that was in a period where a major corporation was basically spending $100 million to make that movie. That's subversive. That's the subversive aspect of it.
Well, I mean, it still lasts to this day just on the desire for every man our age to have those abs. Everybody wants to look like Brad Pitt still.
Yeah, they did. And I think that was part of the threatening emasculation theme that is in that film that says if you don't have this, you're not a man. And it's also a much better movie than the book because I reread the book and I remember loving the book when it first came out. So what do you think of the Eagles?
I am not a Eagles expert by enough means to tell you that.
Could you name 3 songs?
Hotel California.
Okay.
As soon as you name me songs, I will know them, but I do not know the Eagles.
I'm not going to do that.
All right. Well, I'm just going to have to be content with giving the worst answer about the Eagles.
There was just a 3-hour Eagles concert on ESPN over the weekend.
My mom watched it.
I watched it.
My mom watched it. My mom loves the Eagles. 77.
I remember some Don Henley. He had that one hit.
The Boys of Summer.
Yeah, well, that. But then there was one that came out sometime in the mid to late 80s.
He's talking about Dirty Laundry.
It was like a slower song.
Dirty Laundry.
No, I know what it was. It was probably off The End of the Innocence. Right?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that's what it was.
That song, The End of the Innocence?
Yeah, I think so, right?
Well, there was the big, huge ballad from that was The Heart of the Matter, which is a really great song.
Yes.
But
Schlock.
I
see, but the thing is, I
like Schlock.
I would never be able to name them.
Adam, do you have anything you want to say?
I don't know. Talking about shit we've seen. I watched Saturday Night Fever for the first time in a long time over the weekend, and you've been talking about it recently. And I mean, when are they going to come after that movie? There's a lot. It's so good, but it's like when they're talking about the rival gang or the guys that fuck up or whatever.
N-word, spick. I mean, just
S-word, Brett, not spick. S-word.
Oh, S-word, N-word. I mean, and just a lot of slang that's just.
That's
And,
not
well,
on TV.
also just the way that women are dealt with. But it seems so authentic, and it is authentic, I guess. And plus, that movie is just beautiful. It's just a beautiful piece of movie making. Just it's aged so well, and those disco sequences are just stunning. And Travolta was so good. His best performance, probably. So good at that.
You think that now that John Travolta's single, he can finally be himself?
I mean, I think they probably, I would assume, had an open marriage, and I'm sure she knew. I mean, if Carrie Fisher can admit in interviews that we all know John Travolta's gay, it's been an open secret in Hollywood. I mean, I knew about it in the 70s when I told you this, when one of my friend's fathers was a kind of hot screenwriter in town. This is 1978. We were 14, and he was driving us over to Westwood to see some movies, and he had just been up to a ranch that Travolta had. They wanted him to write a film for him. They wanted Rod, my friend's father, to write a film for Travolta. So we went up there to meet with him and the producer, and he said, there were boys everywhere, all around the pool, young, muscled boys everywhere. And so me and my friend were looking at each other, what? John Travolta's gay? And so I kind of had heard this from 1978 onward, and I think you see so many pictures of that period of Travolta. I don't know. Randall Kleiser, working with Randall. Grease was the gayest set that had ever existed. I think that in another world, Travolta could have been an openly gay and probably happy man, but I don't know. I mean, the Kelly Preston, out of all the celebrity deaths, and there seem to be clusters of them now all the time. They seem to be dropping like flies. That was the one that kind of bummed me out the most that weekend. And then it's going to be replaced by another one and another one and another one. But it'll be interesting to see if Travolta does. I don't know if he's still tied to Scientology in the way that he used to. Well, then it's still going to be those masseuses, those masseurs he comes on to and then settles out of court with or whatever. Or that pilot he supposedly had an affair with.
Well, like with Scientology, it wasn't part of their thing. They would, if you're gay, like let's say.
They'll fix you.
Yeah,
They'll fix you.
And they'll create a public front to kind of hide the gayness.
Yeah.
Now, that was in the interest of your film career.
Yeah,
if you're Will Smith or Travolta or Cruise. I don't think Cruise is gay, but they say whatever. But like now, in 2020, wouldn't it be the shrewd move for Scientology to out these dudes as gay and cash in on the woke bucks
and start hiding the guys that are straight?
Woke Scientology.
But you have to understand, you can't be an out, openly gay actor in Hollywood because you cannot show your movies in China, Russia, Saudi Arabia. You can't show them. They won't show them. You're going to get an openly gay action star on the red carpet in China. It's not going to happen. So basically you are making a corporate decision. Like, it's no one's business. If I'm gay, I'm gay. But I am not jeopardizing my empire on the fact that I admit that I suck dick. I mean, that's just not going to happen. And I believe that is why certain stars stay closeted. Their movies can't travel.
Like, dude, Will Smith was just on the internet getting emasculated by his wife.
I know. And
that's a straight man right there.
She was admitting that she had that affair.
He sat there and took it with a droopy face.
Well, again, these are rumors. These are only rumors. And there have been rumors about Will Smith, as there have been a lot of rumors about Tom Cruise. And yes, they're all kind of tied into Scientology. Is Will Smith a Scientologist?
Oh, yeah. Right.
So it's Will Smith, Cruise, Travolta. I wish we lived in a world where no one cared, but, and also, of course, we're talking about Tom Cruise, and it's tied into this podcast to a degree because Nick Pizzolatto and I are going to do a Tom Cruise special.
Is that going to happen?
We were going to do it the week Maverick opened in June, but it was pushed back to December. Nick said, let's do it anyway. Let's just do a Tom Cruise Love Fest anyway, so we'll see if that happens.
I think you should do it.
No, call it the Pleasure Cruise.
Yeah, that's good.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com, and for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.